Namaste, everybody, and welcome to this session. So today we're going to be talking about verse 11 of the 37 practices. So I'll just read out the verse. So verse 11 says, "The practice of all the Bodhisattvas is to make a genuine exchange of one's own happiness and well-being for all the suffering of others. Since all misery comes from seeking happiness for oneself alone, whilst perfect Buddhahood is born from the wish for others' good." So what this verse is talking about here is Tonglen. And Tonglen means that when we breathe out, we're sending out compassion. When we breathe in, we're receiving other people's suffering. So I haven't done this practice during the COVID-19 episode now, because I think for some people it's going to be quite difficult to breathe in other people's suffering. You know, we're having to go around wearing masks on our face, so we're not breathing in. But really here, one, you're in your home and you're in a safe place, and two, we're not really taking on their suffering. The whole point of the practice is to build up compassion in us. And the way to do that is just to imagine that we're taking away their suffering. I mean, what more compassionate thing can we do than to take away somebody's suffering and then give them our compassion? So that's what the practice is about. So the verse says that we have to make a genuine exchange of our own happiness and well-being for the suffering of others. So we have to genuinely want to take away other people's suffering, and we want to replace it with our heartfelt compassion. Since all misery comes from seeking happiness for oneself alone, that's quite a powerful statement, really, there. That since all misery comes from seeking happiness for oneself alone. So you see that the ego and selfishness, it brings on all misery, it says here. So, you know, it's quite a thing then if we're just looking out for ourselves and we're not caring about other people, then all misery will come to us. But whilst perfect Buddhahood is born from the wish for others' good. So perfect Buddhahood here is talking about for liberation from our own suffering. That can only come about when we want to alleviate other people's suffering. If we are just going to focus on our own suffering and just think about ourselves and, you know, what do I need and what do I need to do, then not only will we get misery, but we will never reduce our suffering. And you know, in Buddhism, the spiritual path is about that. It's about liberation from our suffering, freedom from our suffering. It's about alleviating that suffering, not just physical suffering, but mainly we're talking about here is psychological and emotional suffering, which is really our biggest part of the suffering. So to do that, there is the Tonglen practice, which helps us to really have the not only the aspiration, but it's a really, really powerful, strong wish that we want to take away other people's suffering and we want to give them our compassion. So you can imagine that when we're doing this for somebody that we care about a lot, then it's fairly easy to do. When we come to somebody who's a neutral person, so neutral in the way that we don't, so I'm not want to say we don't care about them, but we have no strong opinions of them either way. We don't like them and we don't dislike them. There's just neutral. So it's a little bit harder to give compassion to a neutral person. Then when we try to give it to somebody that we're having difficulty with, somebody that is maybe, we've had an argument with or we were upset with, it becomes very difficult then. But then that's when the practice really comes into its own. You see, when you can give compassion to somebody you love, yeah, we can all do that. Somebody who's neutral, maybe a little bit harder, but it's not too difficult because they've not upset us. But then try to give it to somebody who has upset us. That's when it becomes really difficult for us, because that is where our selfishness comes in. That is where our ego comes in, because we're thinking about us. They said that to us. How dare they do that to us? So we're thinking about ourselves. So it can be really difficult practice to do, to send out that our compassion and take away their suffering. Because maybe in the back of our mind, we're thinking that we quite want them to suffer because they've made us suffer. But as it says here, that type of thinking, that type of behavior is just going to bring you all kinds of misery. So in this meditation, what we do is we visualize a person. So maybe the person we care about, neutral person, the person we're having difficulty with, and then all sentient beings we finish off with. So we imagine their suffering. And then as we breathe in, we imagine that we're taking that suffering away from them. And as we breathe out, we're sending our heartfelt compassion. So taking away the suffering, giving compassion. So that's what Tonglen means. It means sending and receiving, sending compassion and receiving their suffering. So remember, if you're worried about doing this practice, we are not actually taking away their suffering. We are not taking on board their suffering. It's a mental process to build up compassion in us, because if we can imagine that we can really take away people's suffering and give our compassion, then it makes us such a wonderful, compassionate person. So just remember that we're not actually doing that, so don't worry. But when we get to the end of this practice, I'll do a purification, just in case you are worried. So in the purification, what we're going to do is, as we breathe in, we'll imagine that we're breathing in white smoke, pure white smoke of compassion. And as we breathe out, we're breathing out all that black smoke of other people's suffering. So we're breathing out their black smoke of their suffering that we've taken on board, and we're breathing in white smoke of compassion, which will purify us. So don't get too worried that you're going to, take on other people's illnesses. It's not about that. But we really do need to focus on the point that I want to take away their suffering. And not just say that I want to take away their suffering. I mean, really, we want to take away their suffering. We don't want them to suffer. We want them to actually, be kind and be compassionate. We want to send that to them so they can change their suffering into compassion. Okay, so I'll guide you through the meditation practice. So just sit nice and comfortably and lightly close your eyes. And again, to begin with, just focus your awareness on the fact that you're breathing in and you're breathing out. And just keep your focus on that for a moment. So now I want you to think of somebody you care about, somebody that means a lot to you personally, and just bring that person into your mind. And just think of a time when this person has suffered, or maybe they're suffering now. And as you breathe in, imagine that you're breathing in their suffering, you're taking their suffering away from them. And as you breathe out, you're breathing out your compassion to them. And as you continue to breathe in their suffering and breathe out your compassion, just have the intention that you want this person to be free from suffering. You want them to be peaceful and happy. So keep that intention in your mind as you breathe out your compassion and you breathe in their suffering. So continue to breathe in their suffering and breathe out your compassion to this person you care about. So now I want you to focus on your feelings. What does it feel like to take this person's suffering away from them and replace it with your compassion? What does that feel like? So now I want you to keep this person in your mind, but this time I want you to imagine that they're breathing in your suffering and they're sending their compassion to you. So your suffering is going and you're taking on board their compassion. And your intention for doing this is that you can let go of your suffering and you can find peace and happiness. So keep imagining this person you care about taking away your suffering and replacing it with compassion. So continue to imagine that this person is taking away your suffering and sending you their compassion. So now I want you to check in with your feelings again. And what does it feel like when somebody takes your suffering away and offers their compassion to you? What does that feel like? So now I want you to think of a neutral person. So somebody that you may see on a regular basis, but you know nothing about them. Just bring that person into the front of your mind. And remember, even though you don't know this person, they're like the rest of us. They don't want to suffer and they want to be happy. So imagine that you're breathing in their suffering and you're breathing out and sending your heartfelt compassion to this neutral person. And your intention for doing this is to relieve them of their suffering and send them compassion, which is filled with peace and happiness. So continue to breathe in this neutral person's suffering and send out your heartfelt compassion to them. So again, I want you to check in with your feelings. What did it feel like to relieve this neutral person of their suffering and send them your compassion? How did that feel? So now I want you to bring a difficult person into your mind. Somebody that you're having problems with at the moment. Maybe they've said or done something to upset you, or they didn't act in the way you thought they should. Whatever the reason, just bring that person into your mind. And on your in breaths, just breathe in that difficult person's suffering and breathe out your heartfelt compassion to this person. And remember, this person is like you and every other being. They just want to be happy and peaceful, and they don't want to suffer. So your intention for doing this is to alleviate their suffering and give them your heartfelt compassion. So continue to breathe in the suffering of this difficult person and breathe out your heartfelt compassion to them. So now check in with your feelings. How does it feel when you're taking away the suffering of this person who you're not friendly with at the moment, and you're sending your compassion to them. How does that feel? So now we're going to breathe in the suffering of all beings, humans, animals, insects, fish, birds. As there is so much suffering in the world, just pick one topic, poverty or sickness, loneliness, whatever it is. Just pick one topic and then breathe in all that suffering from all these beings and send out your compassion to all of them. And your intention for doing this is to stop the world from suffering and make it a more peaceful and happy place. So breathe in the suffering of all beings and breathe out your compassion. So continue to breathe in the suffering of all beings and breathe out your compassion to them. Now see what it feels like to be breathing in the suffering of all beings and breathing out your compassion to them. How does that make you feel? Even though our intention has been the same all the way through this meditation, our feelings may be different. So before we do the purification practice, I want you to see the difference. How did you feel when you were giving compassion and taking the suffering from somebody you love? How did it feel when you were receiving compassion? And how did it feel when you did the practice for neutral people, a difficult person, and for all beings? Just sit for a moment and reflect on how your feelings change for each group of people. So now we're going to be doing a purification practice. So I want you to imagine that when you breathe in, you're breathing in the pure white smoke of compassion. And when you breathe out, you're breathing out the black smoke of all the suffering that you've taken from these people. So breathe in white smoke of compassion and let that push out all the black smoke of suffering. So now, just very slowly start to open your eyes, but look down on the floor in front of you. And when you're ready, just slowly move your gaze up. So I'm sure that your feelings would have changed. So even though we had the same intention all the way through, I'm sure that your feelings were probably stronger for the person you care about than they were for the neutral people. And they're definitely stronger than the person you're having difficulty with. And even it's difficult to breathe in the suffering from the all beings. So this exercise is just showing you that even though you would probably say to everybody, yes, I'm a compassionate person, if you look at the different categories and you look at the feelings you got from different categories, then you can see where you need to do more work. So maybe you need to focus more attention on neutral people, or on a difficult person, or on all beings. But this practice should have showed you clearly where the work needs to be done, and you then need to think about that. And when you do a compassion practice or a Tonglen practice in the future, this is the areas where you really need to focus on. So I hope this meditation has been of benefit to you. Try to do the meditation again. So these videos are always left here for you to look at and reuse. So later on in a couple of days, try to do these again and see how your feelings change. But keep your intention exactly the same. The intention is that we don't want anybody to suffer, and we want everybody to have a peaceful mind and to be happy. Okay, so thank you very much for joining me today. And I look forward to seeing you again in another session. But until then, namaste.